Just have a seat anywhere. But
You ready?
Okay.
you ready to go?
Mhm.
Yep.
Are you all ready going?
Yeah.
Okay. So welcome. We are going to talk about respecting human dignity, specifically the Catholic perspective on that. But we kind of talked about this before the taping began. If you look at this, you see a double image here. I'm sure a lot of you all have seen this. You see that this has a face, but you also see that this has a face here. If you didn't see that, there it is. And notice, this is a human face. Is it not? You see the human face? And then, is this an absent human face? Is this almost like a ghost? What is this? This is a reverse image. And if you look at this human face over here, this human face, it really isn't very particular either. It's kind of lost its humanity. And then the other side definitely has lost its humanity. So the first thing we need to recognize in a Scythe world is that they have completely jettisoned basic Catholic understandings of existence. So it is a godless narrative. And that's what's making the possibility of how do we carve out meaning in a world without God? Thankfully, that's not our view because that's not the correct view. And Mr. Magre is present, but he will say this. Sometimes students, parents will react to some of these summer readings and say, those don't really reflect Catholic values. We know that. And he said this, and it's kind of stuck for years. He said, we're not the Catholic Amish. We engage the world. We engage questions. And some of the threats to human dignity are still very much threats to human dignity in the world we're occupying, where belief in God is still very much the normative understanding that's out there. So human dignity is not a negotiable concept in Catholic understanding. Every human is made in the image and likeness of God, and because God exists, the natural flow of that allows for the understanding of that dignity to be protected in all aspects of life. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Scythe really pushes that question beyond the boundaries, though, that are already set in Catholic teaching. So Catholic teaching is not going to budge on that. That's wonderful. That's one of the strongest things we do, is say every life matters. But Scythe says that world doesn't exist anymore. That's completely gone. Now, you have zero real understanding of God in the book, except that vague sort of monastic stuff that's going on with the Thomist. And that understanding could have been a session. I don't know if anybody ever picked up on that. But the Thomist, it's kind of a play on the Thomist. And Thomists are people who believe in Thomas Aquinas' teaching and really follow that. So he's got a lot of that interplay. And he has not given up, the author, Schusterman, has not given up this idea of image and likeness. Anybody got an idea of where I see the image and likeness being a real, strong, binding force for characters in the book? Nobody has any guesses? Miss Bars might. She's sitting there processing in the back.
Well, I was thinking about Citra, but I was also thinking about Faraday.
Mm-hmm. Okay. He sees himself in them as kids. Is that what you're, and proteges? I'm thinking more biological image than likeness.
Oh,
There's my hint. Who is going to be blackmailed because of his secret and his desire to protect his image and likeness? There's so many characters. I had to look up his name too. Xenocrates. So Xenocrates, however you say it. He has the illegitimate daughter Esme, and they figured out that that's his daughter, and he wants to protect her. He wants to protect himself too. You've got both of those themes. Yep. But you have this understanding of that there is a connection that still has very strong meaning, because the Scythes do really have the ability to inject meaning into life when she can't be resuscitated if she's taken, because of their ability to install death. So one of the things that he's kind of playing on is, how do you derive meaning? It has to come from the other side or the reverse image. So in order for life to have meaning, you have to be able to lose it. And I think that's what sort of projects his whole understanding. Okay, so that's really kind of the connections with the book that I was going for. But we do want to make sure we talk about threats to human dignity. We're just going to kind of go through this fairly quickly, make sure any of these come up. Because when we talk about these, people have differing views on these life issues as they go, and why the church is resounded to these life issues. We will sometimes say that the church supports life from womb to tomb. So what aspect of human life is not to be respected in any of it? All human life? What about human life that's not so smart? We still need to protect that, right? Yes, because it has that human aspect. Okay, next slide. So when we think about that, we are in a culture, John Paul II is going to say that it's a culture of death, that we are a culture that doesn't always do that, or isn't built up to that. Scythe has completely become a culture of death. And the whole thing is about, it's the people who are even doing the power broking are the death brokers. And that understanding of how that's working is, I mean, this is like an apocalyptic almost vision, already happened. But we live in a culture where this is still being fought out. And the Catholic position is very clear. Catholics will not accept abortion, they'll not accept euthanasia, because natural death is the only real understood way that one can go. And that is related to that understanding that God is the arbiter of all of this existence point. Next slide. When we're talking about this, this also moves into this, and this is another play that's in the book, this idea of human freedom. I have total control of my life. Now, is that true? To a degree. To a degree, I have some control. But anybody in this room create himself or herself? You didn't have control over that. You are in a contributor, that's not a word, but you know what I'm saying. A contributed existence point, that someone else gave you the means through which. Now, parents will also say, this kid of mine, like, where did this come from? This is not me. You have also become a actor on your own accord, which showcases more than just your DNA. So one of the things that I think Scythe becomes very interested in as it rejects it is this mystery of the human person, and this notion of the value that comes from who the human person is, and that's one of the great questions that we're trying to answer, the meaning of this participation. Okay, next slide. When we look at this distorted view of control, we have a sense then that we can make some choices about ourselves and about others that are not going to necessarily be true. That we're going to be able to do things that are not going to be allowable. And we need to recognize that human freedom is a gift from the giver who gave all of that existence. There are couples who try to have children, myself being one of them, and biologically it wasn't happening. Did the kids come into existence? Yes. But did they come into existence way later than my wife and I wanted them to? Also yes. Because do I have total control? No. But did they show up? Yes. But I don't have an absolute right to kids in that sense, because the understanding of that they are gift can't ever be forgotten. And that understanding of life, you have the character, and I'm bad with the names, and there's so many of them, but the opposite of Citra, what's his name? Rowan, is that his name? Rowan. He wants to kill himself, and he makes a game of trying to kill himself, because he's already intuited, what's the point of any of this? If this is just, but we would say what's the point of life for Catholics?
To become the same.
Yeah, well, and that means to love, right? So we can say it in a variety of ways, But love is what's supposed to do that. And love is both a binding force and a freeing force. And we could go back to the very first picture that we saw of the reverse image. Okay? Keep going. Now, this culture of death then means we oftentimes take the easiest way out. The easiest way out is a lot of times not the best choice. Okay? It is oftentimes one of those things where I'm just sort of, nominally engaged. Next slide. We are called to promote a culture of life. And this is womb to tomb. Now, we've got built-in PowerPoint discussions. You can do these on your own because let's all move along, right? Everybody's ready to go? I figured. But when we're thinking about this, is abortion a life issue? Yes. But also quality of life factors into that understanding of life issue. How are people supposed to be treated in life itself? So womb to tomb is not womb and tomb. Womb to tomb. Life issues affect how grandma and grandpa are existing too. Grandma and grandpa aren't useful anymore. Get rid of them. No, that's not right. Even if they have dementia or something like that, they still have value and worth. Okay, next slide. The first issue is Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was passed in 1973, which is the access to abortion. That you probably, we're not going to spend a bunch of time on this because this one is kind of beat to death. You've heard this before. But the church is vehemently pro-life. The church is vehemently understanding that every situation of life is to be protected. Because what did I say about life? Life is a gift, not a right. Okay? And that understanding of it's a gift first moves it into a right. Because who gave the gift? God. So humans can't take away the right if it's God-given. So the right is not what the state has. When we think of rights, we think of this is what's gifted to us by the state. Nope. We're gifted the right to life by being made in the image and likeness of God. Now, if God is removed from the equation, like in Scythe, it's all up for grabs, and that's what you see. Okay? And they're trying to carve out meaning in a world where the meaning has been evacuated. Thank goodness we don't have that problem. We have a centering point, which is the faith. Next slide. We're moving into euthanasia as the so womb to tomb, abortion is the womb issue. Tomb issue is the right to die with dignity, but not the right to die of I'm going to choose when I go, because now we're moving into suicide, assisted suicide. If this is a gift and I say I don't want the gift, I'm also rejecting the giver who gave me the gift. And I'm saying that the experience that lays before me, well, what if it's suffering? Any of you all ever suffered and come out the other side and it was better? And you had a different view as a result of? If you go to the gym, don't tell me you don't suffer. Because you think that going through that process has an end game of benefit. And we don't know what we're dealing with in terms of these things, but we trust the giver that he knows. And in a culture of death, we're making the decision. In a culture of life, we say, this is part of the whole process. Now, the church is not saying, suffer, suffer, suffer. Palliative care, making sure that everybody has pain pills. You're not going to do extraordinary means, but the understanding that there's something bigger going on here than just my choosing this or that is part of this issue. All right, next slide. We have this homeless man here. Again, this is an offense against life because he shouldn't have to live at this connection point with humanity. Basic needs, your soup kitchens in town. Who largely puts those on? Catholic Church, other churches. Because they look upon people who are struggling and say, that's no way to live. And you're not outside of our human connection. We're going to feed you, clothe you, house you as best we can. Now, obviously, people push against that. And it's a complicated issue. But the understanding of that that's our responsibility as their connection point. That's part of this understanding of the human dignity of life. And again, that's that issue of suicide. Mental illness is real. The church has relaxed their understanding of that historically. You may even say that was kind of not so great. Well, we come around, just like Scythe is talking about, we come around to advances and we understand how mental health works. And we understand that suicide is probably not an act of freedom on the part of the person who is successfully doing that. But we recognize that that's an enormous problem. And we're not encouraging it. You're not going to hear. Because nothing, I love those little tattoos that are the semicolon. There is life after the semicolon. You all know what I'm talking about? So people will get a semicolon tattooed on their body as a memory. If they have, it reminds them that where I am in this part of the sentence. A semicolon means there's a part after that sentence that connects both of them together. And that helps sometimes and works sometimes to get people through those tough times, which we all know exist. All right, we're keeping going and we're moving toward the end of the presentation. But this understanding of suicide, we intervene, we want to. We have a counselor here today who can talk to you about those kinds of things. Trinity puts those in place as a Catholic school. Keep going. And then the last one is the death penalty, okay? Sister Helen Prejean is a big proponent, Catholic nun, of anti-death penalty legislation and activism. And I've seen her a couple of times, and she said, and every time that I hear it, it reminds me of that gift portion. She said, even the guilty don't lose their dignity. And why don't they lose their dignity? Because we didn't give it to them. We can't take it away, because even though they acted outside of the parameters that we've talked about a culture of life, even if they've done dastardly things, their gift is from the Creator. And we don't have the agency or authority to take that gift because we didn't give it to them. And that includes their parents. Because I told you about our struggles to have children. As much as my children are my biological offspring, they're also their own person. And that's part of what the Catholic Church wants you to recognize. That there's connection and value, and all of that rests in the life that you've received from the giver, who are both your parents and God. Because you have a body that certainly is from your parents, but you have a soul that's from God. And that contact point keeps us together. So even the people who've done the most awful things, the church is very much for, they need to be brought in and rehabilitated as best they can be, punished as it goes. But it's not your job to determine their end of life. That's for God alone to do. So that's basically the end of the Catholic understandings of the different life events. If you all have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I thought Scythe was a pretty good book. I enjoyed it. And Mr. Margrace here, he asked me about it. He didn't read it. And he said, the premise seems awful anti-Catholic. I said, well, there's not a shred of Catholicism in it in terms of that. But it does play with the ideas of Catholicism. And it does ask the big questions of what Catholicism is asking. Through its sort of dystopian understanding of the future. And notice the thunderhead is replacing God. In the absence of God, something will replace God. All right, any questions anybody has? Didn't I do the best you've ever seen? No, that's what I thought too. Excellent job, you all, for listening. If you have questions, I'll be happy to try and take some. But it's pretty straightforward, and we just need to make sure we reiterate the Catholic viewpoint, and which is the right viewpoint.
Yes. Can I also say,
Yep.
this is the math assignment, if you all don't know what it is. This is the reflection part. So you've done half of the job, the other half is to complete this and make sure you turn it into your math teacher. Does everybody understand that? This should be posted in your, rock space under your math class, but if you want a hard copy, you can come get one on your way out, okay? And that's it.